right, well, hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel on the writing life and the power of words, presented by SLOC Musical Theater. We are so very glad that you're here with us today. And I just wanted to say, my name is Julie Phillips, and I'm one of the co-organizers of SLOC's Writing in the Arts events. And I'm here to welcome all of you. And the chances are that you are listening tonight because you find joy working with the written word as part of your own writing journey. Whether you're a poet, a songwriter, a blogger, a playwright, a journalist, or any of those other creative artists, there are words in all of us ready to be crafted and embraced. So as we get started, I first wanted to introduce you to SLOC's lovely and hardworking Vice President, Adrienne Sherman, who's going to tell you a little bit about what is happening at our theater here in Schenectady. So Adrienne, please go right ahead.
Hello, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time out to do this for us. We really appreciate it. One of the positives that has come out of this shutdown has been the opportunity for us to try some new things that we don't otherwise have the time to get to do. So I really want to thank Julie and her co-chair in this, Zach, who have put together some really great content throughout this month that I've been really enjoying getting to see some different things, and I've learned a lot. So I'm looking forward to this. We are getting ready to get back to an in-person season next year. Now that restrictions are kind of loosening a little bit. So our plan right now is to present 3 shows as part of our regular season next year in the fall, winter, and spring. And those are 3 smaller musicals, Ordinary Days, Songs for a New World, and Violet. And we are in the process right now of looking for directors for those shows. So if anyone is interested in volunteering, being part of a production team, there are lots of ways to kind of get on board. We welcome returning friends and new friends to the theater. So you can always reach out to anyone at SLOC, membership at sloctheater.org, or info@sloctheater.org, or just kind of stay connected to our social media if you want more information on anything we're doing. So I'll turn it back over to Julie, and thank you again.
All right, Adrienne, thank you so much. And let's see. All right. So we are so lucky to have a host of great writers here in the Capital District, and they write within a variety of genres. And we have a great representation here with our panel tonight of 4 folks who are doing some wonderful things in the writing realm. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have author Jennifer Roy. We have blogger and poet James H. Duncan, singer, songwriter, and comedian Erin Harkes, and playwright David Bunce. So welcome to all of you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of them before they speak. And along the way, if you have any questions for James or David or Jennifer or Erin, please put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end when we do a Q&A. So that is plenty for me. I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Roy, and let me just make her the big, the big head here. Let's see. Here we go. Oops. You're all being very patient with me. Thank you. There we go. All right. So this is Jennifer Roy, and Jen is the author of Yellow Star, which is based on the true story of her aunt who survived a childhood in the Lodz Ghetto during the Holocaust. Yellow Star has received multiple awards like the Boston Globe Horn Book Honor Award, as well as starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and School Library Journal. Jen's book Mind Blind is about a teenager on the autism spectrum, and it received starred reviews from Booklist and was an ALA, YALSA Best Fiction for Young Adults choice. Jen's other books include Jars of Hope, which is a Magnolia Book Award winner, and the Trading Faces series that she co-authored with her twin sister, Julia DeVillers. Roy's latest book is Playing Atari with Saddam Hussein, and it was co-authored with Ali Fadhil. It tells the story of his childhood during the first Gulf War and how he grew up to help prosecute Saddam Hussein. In addition to her life as an author, Jen is a popular public speaker and a former gifted and talented K-6 teacher. And she used to pass me really fun and interesting notes in high school, so I'm not at all surprised that she is a talented, successful writer. Welcome, Jen. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Julie. And yes, we have definitely passed some inside jokes that were very amusing in junior high school and high school, along with accompanying doodles. So you might be surprised if you knew me back then, when I was passing notes in class, to imagine that I would grow up to be, among other things, known as a Holocaust author. Because back then I was busy writing and passing notes, and my twin sister and I, instead of passing notes in class, we passed notebooks. So between classes, we'd see each other and we'd slip each other a notebook. And I would write things like, I have piano lessons this afternoon, ugh, and don't wear this outfit tomorrow, I'm wearing this. And because we were identical twins, she would write back, haha, you know, you have to take piano lessons and I don't, but then she'd say, okay, I'll wear this. And we draw pictures of our outfits and things like that, that were so, seemed important back then. And they weren't, but what we were doing was we were getting in the habit of taking the thoughts in our head and putting them down on paper and getting them out. And I know these days, a lot of people put them down on their keyboard and screen. I still use pen and paper because that is the way it naturally flows for me. And so did J.K. Rowling, and although she may not be the best example at the moment, but so people do that. They still write in handwrite, and sometimes that can be the best flow. But my identical twin sister, she writes with her screen. So everybody writes differently, but the one thing that we have in common is we have things in our head and we want to get them out, or we need to get them out. And when we don't get them out, whether it's through art or on stage or just by talking on the phone, they tend to go around and around in our brains. And that's what always happened with me. So I wrote it down, but I did not think I was going to grow up to become an author. As a matter of fact, I started out as a teacher. I got my undergrad in psychology at SUNY Albany, and I got my master's in St. Rose in elementary education. And then I bopped all around the country, lived different places, and came back here, which is wonderful. And now I'm in Saratoga Springs. But when I was teaching, I unfortunately ended up getting an illness. And as I was in the sick bed, I started writing about it. And I sent it somewhere, and they published it, and they paid me. And I said, I can get paid for doing this? This is amazing. And so I started writing teaching materials. But then one day I got an email, and it said, did you know that my mom was one of 12 surviving children of the Lodz ghetto? And I was like, what's a Lodz ghetto? I didn't know. Because to me, I grew up Jewish in the Capital District, and to me, the Holocaust was a scary thing that was in my background history. But it was something that our family didn't talk about. And for over 50 years, no one in my family talked about it until I got that email. And that's the day I called up my Aunt Sylvia and I said, Aunt Sylvia, you know, how come you didn't tell us that you were one of these 12 surviving children? And she said, oh, Jennifer, I was just a little girl. I don't remember anything. And I said, oh, okay. And then we talked about family things. But the next day she called me. She said, Jennifer, I remember something. And then the third day she said, Jennifer, I remember something else. And I said, do you mind if I write it down? And I grabbed what I had nearby, and those were index cards. And I started taking the notes. And she called me up. She said, Jennifer, I'm remembering more and more. So I started writing down all these things. And at the end of 3 months, I was asking her questions and calling her with more questions. And she was, you know, responding to me. I said, wow, this is quite a story. And this is quite a stack of index cards. And she said, Jennifer, I don't remember anything else. And I said, thank you. But then I didn't want to be the one to write this story, because the responsibility of writing such a thing seemed so daunting. But what I did was I said, you know what, now that I know the story, I have to get it out. So I decided to write it from the point of view of a little girl. The little girl who was in that ghetto. And for example, the little girl who in this one part, she was just a small girl, and she didn't understand what was going on around her. And she had a star put on her coat. And this is a representation of that. And it ended up becoming a verse. And I'd never written in free verse before, but this is how it ended up coming out. And I wrote, the Star of David. Orange is the color of my coat with matching muffler that I got as a present before the war. Dora got the same set, only larger and in blue. Yellow is the color of the felt six-pointed star that is sewn onto my coat. It is the law that all Jews have to wear the Star of David when they leave their house or else be arrested. I wish I could rip the star off, carefully stitch by stitch, so as not to ruin my lovely coat, because yellow is meant to be a happy color, not the color of hate. And as I wrote, I thought, yes, this is the way I want this to come out. So all I did was just write down everything she had told me, but I wrote it down from how I imagined a little girl's eyes would be, and it came out in verse. Now, when I was doing this, I did not know it was going to get published. I thought to myself, well, at least I'm getting my family story down and getting it out of my head. And that's one of the things I want to inspire you with, is that I did not do this to become an author. I did not get my MFA in writing. I'd never taken a writing class, but I have always been a huge reader and always, as I said, been writing to myself. And it finally came out this way. And I got it to an educational publisher who passed it on to another publisher who published this book, Yellow Star. And little did I know, within 3 weeks of it being published, all of a sudden it started winning major awards. And suddenly I was on stage with all the authors that, my school students had read about and the authors I grew up reading. So it launched me in a surprising way. And then after that, I realized, okay, this is something that I am talented at and that I can do. But every single time I wrote my second book, which terrified me because I thought, oh no, I can't replicate it. I decided I had to get the stories out of my brain about being a mom of a son on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. I just want to get this out of my head. Once again, I wrote it down. I happened to write it from the point of view of a boy on the spectrum. And I asked people who are on the spectrum to read it to make sure. And I think that's really important because since then I have written with other people. For example, my book, Playing Atari with Saddam Hussein, strange title, but incredible story about a boy who grew up in Iraq just wanting to be American. And he ended up growing up to help take down the dictator that had killed so many of his family members, Saddam Hussein. I tell people stories. I help them tell stories. Now, there's diverse voices. There's a big movement these days. So I'm not going to pretend that I can tell anyone's story because I can't. But the stories that I have told, for example, in Jars of Hope, which is a book about a nurse, and I did not illustrate it. It's an incredible illustrator, Meg Owenson. These books are about other people. However, one book that was a little more autobiographical is the pink and purple girly books that are very different from, what I've showed you so far. And these I wrote with my identical twin sister. And these are the Trading Faces series. And these are about identical twins who trade places in middle school. And one of them is an academic and the other one's a fashionista. And they end up finding out what it's like to be, on the other side of, what it's like the other groups in school. And I could do this because I was one of those twins. And so is my sister, but I'm not going to tell you who was the academic and who was the social climbing fashionista at the moment. But anyway. But I can tell you that my twin sister, at the same time I was writing Yellow Star, my twin sister was writing her first book. Yes, I swear this wasn't planned. But her first book got turned into a Disney Channel movie. So we are very, very lucky, very grateful, very blessed, but also very humbled, because I am honored that I get to talk to students all over the country, all over the world, and about, telling them the story of my aunt. And my twin sister got to be in a Disney Channel movie. So people were like, "You're twins. What do you write?" And she says, "Oh, I wrote a Disney Channel movie." And I say, I wrote, my book is about the Holocaust. But it doesn't matter. It's what you have, what story you have inside your head. And this is what I tell kids, because the history that we are living now, your kids are going to be asking you, what was it like in a global pandemic? What was coronavirus? They'll ask you. There's only things that you know and that you've lived that you'll be able to write about. And whether it's fictional and science fiction or fantasy, whatever it is, I strongly encourage you to do it, because it feels a lot better having it live outside your body, whether it's in the drawer, like many of my written things are, or living in libraries and bookstores, as I'm very fortunate that these have become. Because no matter what, it's a lot better than having it going around and around in your brain for your whole life and you wondering what could have been or what could have made it. Because as our illustrious panel introducer says, we passed notes. We passed notes in school. And I don't get to say this very often because I speak to school children and I don't necessarily encourage that. But I did get good grades. But I also got these things out of my head and onto paper. And whatever it is that you are thinking of writing or you do write, whether it's in song or poetry, and I can't wait to hear about everybody else's, I really think it's very important that we recognize we each have our own voices and we can only tell it in our way. Just like I wrote Yellow Star in free verse, which I'd never written verse.
Oh, Jen, are you still there? We're having a hard time hearing you.
I hear you now.
Oh,
I lost connection. I see that now. I guess whatever I wanted to say, I just wanted to finish up by saying whatever you have, in your head, whether it's about serious topics, silly topics, whatever it is, please get it out of your head and put it down. Get it out there. You can share it or not share it. But it's just so satisfying and wonderful to be able to, gift the world with your words. Even if you're just gifting yourself, it makes you feel better. And I'm very grateful. So thank you.
All right, Jen, thank you so much. We appreciate sharing all of that and showing us the covers of your wonderful books, available at your local independent bookstore or library. All right. Well, I am very pleased to introduce our next panelist. I'm going to put him there. He is. All right. This is James H. Duncan, who is the editor of the Hobo Camp Review. He's a former editor with Writer's Digest and American Artist magazines. He is also the author of Vacancy, What Lies in Wait, Beyond the Wounded Horizon, and We're All Terminal, but This Exit is Mine, among other books of poetry and fiction. His columns, poetry, and stories have appeared at Albany Poets, Pine Hills Review, Drunk Monkeys, Plain Songs, Poetry Salzburg Review, Up the Staircase Quarterly, and elsewhere. And James travels by road and rail as often as he can to review independent bookshops for his blog, The Bookshop Hunter, which is a really great read, and I recommend it. So we are welcoming James Duncan. Please go right ahead, James.
Thank you very much. Yes. As you said, I write the Bookshop Hunter blog, among a lot of other things. And the blog is a series of reviews of independent bookstores from a book browser's perspective. Each one of the posts is a rundown of my personal experience, and I try to describe, what each shop sells, the range of how much the books might cost, the quality of the used books, any amenities they might have, like coffee shops or places to sit, basically what makes the shop unique. And the idea came from researching new bookstores to visit just one weekend a few years ago. And I discovered that within about an hour's drive of Albany, there's at least 50 independent bookstores. And you go another hour beyond that, and there's at least another 50. And that's a lot of bookstores. And we're pretty lucky to live in an area that has that many. And I'm sure we can all think of a handful of those, but there's a lot of them that are hidden in these little towns out of the way, or in barns in Columbia County or Dutchess County, or places like that. And not a lot of them had information about themselves online. Some did, but many didn't. And just a photo or a dot on a map, or maybe a one-line review on Google that just said, this bookshop is great, which isn't very helpful. And I realized that there's book reviewers everywhere, all over social media, all sorts of apps and websites. Everyone's reviewing books, but no one's really writing about the places where book lovers like to spend their time. And I thought of Toni Morrison's quote, "If there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you have to be the one to write it." And I know that bookshop reviews may not be as consequential as a book necessarily, but I saw an opportunity to fill a need. And I also took it as a personal challenge. And so over a series of weekends and day trips going on 3 years now, 3 years now this month, actually, I began visiting shops around New York and New England and beyond, wherever I go. And it's been a lot of fun. And I've met a lot of fascinating people, and the feedback's been really positive. And to me, it proved Morrison's point that if no one's writing about it, that's an opportunity. And that's a valuable lesson for all creatives to keep in mind, asking ourselves every day, what can I contribute that's new or unique? And sometimes it jumps right out at you, like this blog idea. I looked for something, it wasn't there, I went ahead and did it. But sometimes it's harder to see amongst what everyone else is creating and saying, and it might feel like there's no room for your ideas, or what you want to say isn't unique enough. But if we can step back and assess our own passions and experiences and compare that against what others are saying and doing, sometimes we can see where there's overlap, and sometimes you can see where there's gaps. And that can be hard to do, but if you're diligent and you look for your chances, you'll come across them. And we can find all kinds of ways to add to the greater creative conversation, especially if we're willing to take a step in a new direction and try a creative medium or style that's different from anything we've tried before. And this is something that I've always really encouraged other writers to do, taking a chance to write something that's completely different, like get outside your comfort zone. If you write poetry, try flash fiction, which is actually a surprisingly easy transition to do. If you're working on a memoir and you're stuck, maybe try expressing those ideas through like a haiku. If you're really into sci-fi, maybe write a picture book for kids, and even if that's sci-fi too. It's trying anything, every style, because you don't know what's going to be fulfilling unless you try it. And even if you're not good per se, it might still bring you pleasure, and that's often good enough. And publication and praise and things like that, that's, we all crave that to varying degrees, but the bare bones necessity of being satisfied day to day in the creative life, to me, that's variety. And I've worked, as you mentioned, as a writer for magazines, a book editor for Writer's Digest. I write poetry, short stories, novels. I manage a tiny little online lit mag. And anything I blogged was really just PR for myself for a long time. What I got published here, what book I'm working on. But this blog was a mix of travelogue and literary review. So it allowed me to shift my focus a little bit towards something that's beyond myself. And this has been really beneficial to me for all of my other creative projects, because sometimes when you work on something for a very long time, a novel or whatever, you can get into a rut. It's natural. Your mind gets so used to working in a very specific creative way. And we occasionally hit a wall, we get stuck. And forcing that issue, trying to break the writer's block just by running through that wall, it can be self-torture sometimes. So just grinding it out isn't always doing that project any favors. So being able to step away and write something completely different, it breaks the pattern. It alters how you think and create. It can be a breath of fresh air. If you can step away from it and maybe take a notebook to the park and jot down some poems, or imagine some dialogue that some people are saying as they walk by, whatever, you can go back to that first project with fresh eyes and fresh perspective. Or maybe you're just looking for an excuse to buy books like I was. So whatever it is, look for opportunities, and adding variety to your creative routine, that can be really important too. But another benefit to the blog for me was it gave me a chance to support the literary community in a different way. Like I said, I'm an editor, a little online mag called Hobo Camp Review. I've been doing it since 2009, mostly poetry and fiction. And that allows me to take a break from sharing my own work and share other people's work, which is very satisfying. And this blog gives me a chance to do that in a different way. It's a chance to be a cheerleader for indie bookstores and connect readers to stores that they might have never known about. And since I've started, I've corresponded with a lot of bookshop owners afterwards who are really excited that their shop got some recognition online, which many don't always get. And these owners work really hard, dedicating their lives to these shops. And so seeing them get excited about something and hearing back from them, having this correspondence, it was deeply satisfying. And it's a reminder that these blogs can have real world consequences on shops that are looking for any angle possible to get their word out. So my policy has always been to never badmouth or trash a shop for any reason. I don't rate them or give grades like I would, people would for a book or a movie. It's important for me to not do that because these are little cultural centers. They're bastions of the written word out there where big box stores and online shopping dominates. So it's been important for me to focus on what the shops offer, not what it's lacking, and to be as honest as possible about my experiences there. Being honest with the subject and the reader is an important balance to strike in anything that you want to write. But overall, it's been positive. People continue to email shops saying, you should check this one out here in this town, or have you been there? And sometimes they ask, I'm going on a road trip. Do you know any place over, near Buffalo or something? And that's been a lot of fun. It feels really good. And you see this and you suddenly recognize all these new connections that you didn't notice before, and you feel a part of that greater community. It's the same feeling that you get when you go to open mics or take workshops or even just attending something like this tonight. Every time we can step away from our writing desk and go share our work or share someone else's work or raise up someone else's passion or struggle, we're building on that community. And that can give us new insights too, new inspiration. It can propel our work into new realms. It can make a lot of new friends that way. And my little blog has certainly done that for me. It started out as a fun personal challenge, but in reality, it gave me a chance to say something new, a chance to support the community. It helped me change gears and create in a different way. It's been really great. And I know blogging has been around forever. It's old hat for a lot of people, but if it's not something that you've ever tried and maybe you're interested in, I do have a few quick tips I'd be happy to offer here. The biggest and most obvious thing, of course, is write about something that you're passionate about, whether it's gardening or kids or a memoir in blog form or brewing beer or bookshops or whatever, just so long as you don't run out of steam in 6 months. I would also recommend writing a lot of them first before you begin posting anything. That way you've got a stockpile of things and you're always ahead of the game. When you first begin, go ahead and post a handful at once. That way people coming to the site when it's brand new, they get a solid amount of content right out of the gate. It's also a good idea to post consistently. That way readers get used to seeing new material. I started weekly and slowly moved to monthly when the pandemic hit, since it's harder to get out now, but hopefully that's changing soon. I also recommend mixing up the type of content. Again, variety. Some posts might be straight narratives, lists, top 5. They might be photo heavy, whatever. I sprinkle in interviews with writers about their favorite shops, and it gives them a chance to promote their work. And it gives me a chance to highlight shops that I might never get to visit. So I did write a blog about all of this with a lot more tips and in a lot more detail. And that's at my website right now. But regardless of what you write, whether it's blogging or a novel or poetry, I just hope you remember to, again, look for new opportunities, be proactive about supporting the writing community, and keep your creativity alive by just being open to new and challenging ways of writing. And yeah, that's all I have to say about blogging at the moment. But since everyone else is reading a little piece tonight, I thought I would actually hit on that topic of variety. And maybe instead of reading a blog post or something, I'm going to share a brief poem. This is from my book, Vacancy. It's a book of poems about hotels and motels. And the poem I would love to read for you is called Roundabout Midnight. Somewhere out there is Houston, a dome of orange lights against a Texas night, with highway sounds humming against concrete walls and glass windows, and the air conditioners hum sealing off the world. Curtains drawn over sparkling skyline incandescence, glimmering filaments of a million lives spinning like electrons around a now silent and remote hotel room downtown, no town, nowhere, removed from existence. The bathroom, stark white, and now steaming as hot water fills the tub. A little radio there playing Miles Davis, playing old recordings of Jack Kerouac reading his works, playing the somber piano songs of early Tom Waits as you slip into the water. The sheen of worry and money and medicine and time clocks and traffic and love and no love and also desire, peeling away and dissolving into the heat, the music, the silence, the basic necessity to remove the skin and the bone and the cells holding us to this spinning neutron, and letting ourselves become one with the void between the dark space of no matter the time or year or age or dependency. This is so vital to what it means to be alive, the ability to not be, the ability to sense it leaving us and sense it return as the water cools, as the music stops, and as you open your eyes to stark white forever, to raise your foot and push the lever for more hot water as the next soft notes of Miles Davis begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. My gosh. And thank you for sharing that. Makes me want to go to lots of bookstores now. All right. Well, just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions, to feel free to jot them in the chat as folks are talking. And we are then going to go on to our next panelist. So here we go. We have got Erin Harkes, who is a singer-songwriter and musician who's released 4 albums of original material. And her music comes from triumphs over tragedy. And although sometimes somber, there's always a resounding theme of resilience. The power of Erin's voice and the emotion that comes through in her lyrics make you want to sit and listen to every word. Her lyrics tell stories of her life, and they're sung through a big voice that's often compared to Janis Joplin. And if that weren't enough talent, Erin is also a stand-up comedian who's achieved local success and performed in most major clubs in New York City, Toronto, and Montreal. She also won a spot on the Battle of the Instant Bands on Jimmy Fallon's show. Erin is regularly voted the best singer-songwriter, solo musician, and comedian in the Capital Region by the Times Union Readers Poll and the Alt. Whether singing songs or telling jokes, Erin commands attention every time she steps foot on stage, and we're looking forward to hearing from her. Thanks, Erin. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, everybody, for having me. I guess a little history of me. First of all, I would like to introduce myself as probably the least articulate speaker that you're going to hear tonight, so enjoy. I started writing, I guess, at a fairly young age. I don't really remember exactly when it was, but I do remember my 6th grade teacher joking that she wanted a copy of my first book. And I remember like asking my mom, like, what does she mean by that? So I guess I was writing, at that age. When I got into a junior high and high school, it was just little like poems and stories and stuff. And they were usually because they were assignments. So it was never really something that I did on my own. It was always something that was assigned by a teacher. When I got into high school, I started to actually really enjoy it and write a lot more. And I started to also play piano, and I sang in choir and stuff like that, but I was never like a standout musician by any stretch. It was always, background kind of thing. And we had a joint project with the English class and the music class where we submitted our poems to the music class, and the music class made them into songs, and we had a big assembly in the school. And my English teacher pulled me aside and said, I want you to make one of your poems into a song, like do it yourself. And so again, it was assigned to me, and I wrote my first song. and played it in front of the whole school. It was just terrifying, but I'm glad that I did it. After that happened, something strange started to happen for me. Like I started to get songs that would just pop into my head. And I think it's because of how I started that I was always very lyric driven. Like the lyrics would come first. And so this was new. I would get like a melody in my head with some words attached to it. And I would just try to write it down on whatever I could find handy. And I'm not a very organized person. So, I mean, it would be like, with a eye pencil on the back of a receipt, or, whatever I could find to write with and whatever I could find to write on, I would just jot it down. And then I got a little tape recorder and would record some of the melodies so that I would remember when I got back to my piano. When I didn't have a piano handy, I would have to run across campus every time one of these songs occurred to me. And practicability of it, just so I could have it handy to try and strum out some of the music that was just popping into my head. But again, I mostly focused on the words. I would just write down words. And I think the first like lesson that I had, and the most important lesson that I had, was just to make sure that I got everything down and not to edit it as I was writing it, because there would be, I'm obviously more difficult. Like I'm harder on myself than anybody else will ever be. And so if I'm going through and I'm editing it as I'm writing it, I'm never going to get it all out. And so because of that, I have stacks and stacks of notebooks and tissues and napkins and whatever, just stuffed into drawers of the worst notes ever. And I find them sometimes and I laugh. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't believe you wrote this. You should be embarrassed. But I don't throw it away. I still tuck it back in there and save it for whenever. So I began to continue to write songs and play them on the guitar and just wrote nonstop. And while I was in college, I was able to finish an entire album worth of music. And by my senior year, they finished a studio on campus and I was able to record my first album, which was pretty cool. I, look back on it now, it's hilarious to me now. Like the things that you write about at the time, when you look back on them, especially when you write about things like heartache, in your teens, is obviously a much different heartache than you experience as you get older. And I read or listen to something when I was 19, and I just kind of want to, pet that girl and be like, oh, you thought that was rough. Guess what? Wait for your 30s. But anyway, so I just continued to write. Just like a side note, but it is it's important to the story, was I also had a little bit of a problem with like alcohol and drugs after college and throughout the beginning of my musical life. And I was writing a lot. Wrote a lot of stuff, and some heavy stuff, some darker stuff, and but I was definitely writing nonstop. And when I got sober in 2010, I found that I was incredibly blocked. It was hard for me to try and find that place again. For some reason, I equated it with also getting high or getting drunk. And so it was very difficult for me to sit and write. I don't know if it was a trigger that I thought I would be back in that dark space if I attempted to do it. And so for many years, I didn't write anything at all. I would jot down a note here or there, but I didn't really write any new music or any new poetry or even short stories. There wasn't really enough inspiring me to do so. And for me, it kind of seemed like a trade-off for a much needed sobriety. And so I didn't fight it that hard. And luckily, after a little while, it started to break and things started to happen again. And it's a whole different type of writing now. It's a whole different thing, a whole new experience. I still didn't write lyrics for the longest time, but what I started to do is I started to write jokes. And in 2013, I started to try doing those jokes on stage, which was honestly more terrifying than anything I had ever done in my life. And the difference between writing songs and writing jokes, it's the same idea of just getting it all out and then editing it later. But with the jokes, the format, and there's so many different interesting, and like everybody has a different process, but there's so many different like rules in comedy for what makes a good joke. You know, there's a rule of threes, and there's, you know, like a callback, and you know, you don't want to like be repetitive in certain things. And so it was just a whole different, used a whole different part of my brain to try and write these jokes out. I would write like one note, and then hopefully when I got back to it, when I could sit and work on it, I would remember what I found so funny a while ago. And sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with something in my head, and I would chuckle to myself and roll over and write it down or type it into my phone. And then I'd wake up the next day and I'd be like, potted plants, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, but like I would remember laughing so hard that I would be afraid that I was waking my partner up in the middle of the night. And then in the next morning read it, and I was like, that's ridiculous. But I still, again, would not throw it away. I would come back to it for some reason. So luckily, I was waiting for the music to start coming back to me, because like I said, it was just so blocked up for many years. And a few years ago I wrote a song, and I hoped that that would snowball into more songwriting, and it didn't. It was like kind of like a one-shot deal. And then when the pandemic hit, one of the first things that I said to myself, I told myself that the reason why I wasn't writing songs anymore was because I was so busy. When I started to play music full time, I was playing anywhere from 4 to 9 times a week. And the last thing you want to do after you perform is come home and perform some more, you know? And so I also didn't really have, like, I felt like the creativity was just shut off, because I was just like, my brain was just exhausted from everything else that I was doing. And so when the pandemic first hit, I told myself that maybe I would use this time off to get some writing done. For me, what's really important is that I don't ever force anything. If I sit and say I'm going to write today, it's not going to be good. It's not going to come out the way I would want it to. Unfortunately, when it does hit me, it's usually at a time where I can't sit and write on it. So that's why I keep the notes and hope that I can go back to it later on. And then a few months ago, luckily, something just shook free in me, and I started to write songs again. And it feels like the old me, but without the substances. And I've been able to start to write a lot more again, and I'm very excited about it. I think the most important thing that I could impart to anybody again is write every single thing down and then edit it later. And don't be so hard on yourself. You're going to write some terrible things, but you're also going to write some beautiful things, and you have to weed through and pick out the things that are worth saving. But what might make sense to you at one point might not make sense to you a year from now, and vice versa. So it's important to just get it all down and just like let it all out there, and then go back and pick through it later on. But I feel very lucky that I have different outlets that I can express myself. I like that I have, you know, the music, the more serious kind of thing, and then I can kick back and write some jokes and get to try those out. I'm looking forward to getting back to the performing for the public again soon too, and see if any of these jokes I've written in the past year are worth sharing with anybody. But I guess that's it for me. So thank you very much again for having me.
Oh, thanks, Erin. That's wonderful to hear about both perspectives, about the songwriting as well as the comedy. So thank you. And Erin does have
Thanks.
a comedy album that just came out, right?
Yes, I do. I right before the pandemic, I recorded an album up in Toronto, and it took a little while for it to come out because of everything. And so it finally was finished in February. We picked the date, and it came out last week. And so far, so good. I'm very excited. It's my first time releasing a comedy album, so it was a completely different. You know, I know how to do music. I know who to talk to. I know who to promote with. And the comedy, I was like, you know, I don't know comedy radio stations. I know the music ones, but the Capital Region has been great to me with promoting the new things that I do. And I couldn't be more grateful for that.
Well, good luck with that. And people can find it at
Thanks.
your website, right? ErinHarkes.com?
Yep. ErinHarkes.com.
And that, right. And that's Harkes with an E, not like Hark the Herald.
Yes.
Hark with,
No, Harkes. Harkes.
yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erin. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we are going last, but certainly not least, we are going to go to David Bunce. So David, I'm going to, let's see. All right. There's David. Welcome. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about David. He is a playwright with credits including Red Maple at the Capitol Repertory Theater, an adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the one-man show Dogs of War, and Shakespeare's Soldiers at the Theater Institute at Sage. The Fall of the House of Usher, which is a musical adaptation reading at New York State Theater Institute, and the one-act Lunch at the Actors Attic in Hartford, Connecticut, and at Penn State University. David's screenplays include Gasoline and Lightning for Edgewood Studios, Incisions, and Learning to Fly. And then if that wasn't enough, television scripts, pilot scripts he's done include Soups On and The Middle Ages. And David has also had directing assignments that have included the films All for the Birds, Pete Dubisher and the Berkshire Bird Paradise, and Breakfast of Champions, as well as directing stage productions of Last of the Mohicans, the outdoor drama in Lake George, and Lord of the Flies, A Christmas Carol, Radiance, The Passion of Marie Curie, Number the Stars, and The Giver for the Theater Institute of Sage. David is also a proud member of the Dramatists Guild, Actors Equity Association, SAG-AFTRA, and the Society of American Fight Directors. So David, thank you so much for being with us, and please go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for inviting me. I have two disclaimers. One is that I realized I picked the squeakiest chair in my home, so I'm going to try not to move the whole time. And hopefully, if you hear any of that, it's my chair. And secondly, my second disclaimer is I think I feel like a fraud here, total fraud, for two reasons. One, because all these wonderful people work so hard at writing and have spent much of their lives doing it. And I have, and at the same time, I have not spent my life as a writer for a living primarily. It's just one of many, many things I do. The other reason I've always felt like a fraud in terms of a writer, because I was a solid C at best English student when I was a kid. I came from a family of laborers, a father who was a bulldozer operator, took all the shop classes, never planned to go to college, and never ever planned to spend my life in something as literary or literate as the theater. But after a few years of working construction, I just decided out of the blue one day I was going to go check out the local community theater in Connecticut, where I live, and found how I spent my life for a career. Out of that, I fell in love with the theater, and I went to college. And I still didn't plan on writing being a big part of my life, because I fell in love with acting, and I went to school for acting. I studied to be an actor. And looking back, I did a couple of goofy satiric scenes that I wrote for maybe an award show in college or something of that nature, but that was about it. I was young. My wife and I lived in New York City, both trying to get work as actors and auditioning and not getting a whole lot, and just going a little bit stir crazy, and decided to start to write something. And I guess a lot of things were sort of working subconsciously for me that I didn't realize. I started out, I said, okay, I'm going to write down a little bit of just a location. I started with a location. One of the jobs I had when I was a roofer's helper, I was an assistant on a flat roof crew working on the top of a 40-story building in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. And at lunchtime, we'd all go down in one of those exterior elevators, go all the way down the skeleton of the building. And we would sit on the corner of the street, half a dozen, maybe 10 construction guys, and have lunch. And I used to listen, participate a little, but mostly just listen to all the conversations. And so when I sat down in New York, out of work as an actor, looking to do something creative, I said, okay, I'm just going to try to write a scene of these construction guys. I kind of could hear the flavor of their voices in my head. And I had a very clear image of what the set would be if it was on a stage, just this little street corner with these, these guys sitting on boxes and having lunch. And I just started out that way, and I could kind of hear the rhythm and the vocabulary of, construction guys. But I found rather quickly that I cared about writing about something. And I found rather quickly that I decided I wanted to have it about 3 people, and it was generational. There was an 18-year-old assistant. There was a 35-year-old guy who'd been doing it for a while, and there was a guy in his 60s who was getting close to retirement. And I decided they would be iron workers. So they wouldn't be roofing guys, they'd be iron workers, because there's something more precarious about iron workers. They're up high, they're walking steel. And as I wrote, I realized I started to write more and more that the youngest character was realizing that the oldest character wasn't doing well, wasn't doing physically well, wasn't doing mentally well, and was really getting to a point where this person should not be up in the air on this kind of a job, and would express this thought to the 35-year-old character, and the 35-year-old character wanted absolutely nothing to do with it and would just try to shut the kid up, and was really the caretaker of the older man. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that there was a relationship in my life, that I had somebody in my life who I thought needed help. And I came from a very sort of New England, everything's fine, whether it's fine or not background, where you didn't talk about anything that wasn't good. So I was carrying this burden of somebody in my life I felt needed tremendous help, and nobody was willing to do it. And I was the young guy recognizing this. So I realized fairly quickly that I was putting myself in the part of the 18-year-old. I was writing the perspective of shut up, everything's good on the part of 35-year-old. And then I was writing the part of the person who needed help as the older person. And so instead of just trying to spend time being creative and not go stir crazy, I became more and more and more involved in this piece that I was writing. It turned out to be a 1-act that I thought was, oh, this is good. My wife read it and liked it, and was complimentary. And then we went off to Penn State to do graduate work. We left New York City, and I handed it to somebody to look at Penn State, and they loved it. And they said, oh, let's do this. We have a 1-act, a slot in our season for a 1-act. And they did it there, and that got me more and more. That at least got me the first time ever in the process of sitting in a rehearsal room, a director saying, well, do you think this works? Could we do this, or could we change something? Or asking me questions that I had to think about. And that sort of collaborative process from a writer's standpoint. And that got me started. I eventually spent my career as an actor, primarily. And that I found fed my enjoyment of writing scripts and my love of writing scripts, because I was constantly wrestling with other writers' words. So I became not only a reader, which I wasn't in high school, but I became an interpreter of other people's writing. So I really had to analyze in great, great, great detail. And that could be something like a Harold Pinter, with the rhythm of somebody. Harold Pinter would write things like a scene between 2 people who was like, what? No what? Not again. Yes. No. And, people wrestle with Harold Pinter's language and say, what the hell does this mean, this scene? But I could wrestle with that. I could wrestle with Shakespeare. I could wrestle with Sam Shepard, all kinds of different writers as an actor, and try to understand their rhythms, their vocabulary, their meanings. And that certainly helped me. So eventually, within my acting work, I continued to write. I realized how much of a love I had for film script, and started to write screenplays. And throughout both, I started to find my own voice. I do find to this day, every time I'm inspired to write something, it's because I have something that I'm wrestling with as an issue. Most of my issues are about relationships, and that is perfect because most of the issues in plays are about relationships. Thematically, you can talk about war and peace, but in scene by scene, it's usually between two people or a couple of people, and those are struggling relationships constantly. So I start out to write something usually because I'm trying to work something out for myself. And then instead of being strictly biographical, I tend to fictionalize and use elements of my own life, elements of my own story, but fictionalize them and put them into a different context, a different setting, and make up characters. So it's a combination of my issues going into a fictionalized story. If I had advice for anybody for playwriting, I started out to think, oh, playwriting's good because that's just people talking to each other. I don't have to know grammar. I don't have to know style in writing, and all those things I really kind of ignored as a young student. But I rapidly found out, oh no, there's a tremendous amount of rules, not only literary rules, but rules very, very, very specific to drama, the form of drama and dramatic conflict and the 3-act structure and all these different things. So if I had advice for anybody, first, I would hope that you would write for fun. And you would write because you have a good time doing it, and it's exciting to do it, and it's a wonderful creative opportunity for you, because the chances of making a living at it or something huge happening down the road are so difficult. But if you can do it for fun, it can be any number of things in your life. And as Jennifer said, she wrote because she wanted to write, and then it turned into something entirely different and more, which is a great thing. But if you're writing because you love to write, you've already won. And then as a playwright, you want to communicate. If there's something you want to communicate, and communicate with a lot of people. Ideally, plays are done for audiences. Ideally, they're done for a lot of people. And it's a collaborative thing. You've got to work with other people. You've got to be able to work with your actors who say, why do I do this? Why does he say that? Why does she say that? A director who says, you really think that builds the scene the way you want to? A producer who says, can you cut 2 characters because I don't really want to pay 2 extra salaries? So you've got to work with all kinds of different people. You've got to be tremendously curious about people and relationships and how people get on, why we do what we do, why we treat each other the way we do, why we talk to each other the way we talk to each other, because plays are about people talking to each other. They're not about narrative description of the beautiful field or something like that. They're about people talking to each other. And then learning form. And I think I'll try and stop there. I'll share a little something if I have time. So what I'm trying now, my father died in 2008, and I'm working out a few things about my relationship with him. And this is a play that I'm writing, and I'm actually setting it in County Longford, Ballinolly, Ireland, because I'm an Irish wannabe. So I'm actually taking the risk of working on writing an Irish play. I've run it by several Irish actors who are friends, and everybody's been kind to me so far. It's in process. I will say that it's been very hard for me to write this year. I've had so many strong feelings about politics and any number of things that it's been hard for me to concentrate on this piece. But I'll read this. This is the opening monologue. This is Aidan, who runs the Lamb Pub in Ballinolly. He comes down stage and he talks to the audience, and it's been a very long time. Forgive my Irish accent. When I was 9 years old, my father set me to fighting a boy 2 years my senior. Da organized a boxing match between me and the other fella. I had no interest in boxing a boy I'd never met before, but my father thought I needed toughening. When he first told me about the whole thing, I thought nothing of stepping into the ring. I wasn't brave. I was naive. I didn't have a clue what I was getting into, so I didn't have the sense to be apprehensive. But as the big day approached, I started to get a bit nervous. And then the bit of nervous turned into a bit of a scared. And I started to get cramps in my stomach. It got so bad I sometimes doubled over with the pain. And my da, he took this as a good sign, a sign that I was preparing to go into battle. You see, my father didn't want me to be me. Not as I was, anyway. He wanted to be some version of himself that he had planned to become, but never quite had. He wanted a warrior. Well, I wasn't a warrior. So the big day came. My father made a great spectacle of it all. He stretched ropes and set a ring in the center of town, right in front of the Lamb pub. He thought it was great crack. He invited all his drinking buddies to come out and watch. Now, I knew nothing of the manly art of pugilism. My father knew that I know nothing, and he knew that the boy he had set me to fighting was the junior boxing champion of all of the County Longford. Set me up, he did, against the junior champion. Somebody rang a bell and the fight was on. The other boy proceeded to beat on me like I was a punching bag. And to my credit, I did a brilliant imitation of a punching bag. This went on for what seemed like an hour, but was probably about 45 seconds. And it was obvious to the spectators that they were witnessing a massacre. Pretty quick, your man, he realizes he's punching a fella that isn't going to punch back. I think he was a little confused about why he was there in the first place. Me da screamed at him to keep swinging, but he had lost the inclination. I fell to my knees, crying and bleeding from my nose, but I couldn't feel the pain of my bleeding nose. All I could feel was the pain of the betrayal of my da. I couldn't get over the betrayal of my da. He never did forgive me for being a coward, and I never forgave him for wishing I was somebody else. That's it. Thank you.
So much, David. Thank you. Wonderful. I can't wait to hear the rest. All right. Well, gosh, thank you so much to Jennifer, James, David, and Erin for sharing their time and talents right now. We are going to go to some questions that have come in, and if any questions come up for anybody, please type them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them. So the first one, I think, James, it's directed towards you. What types of books do you hunt for when you visit a new bookstore, and what would a treasure be that you'd be thrilled to find?
Well, I guess it all depends on the type of shop. You know, if I'm going to a shop that mostly sells new books, I have a affinity for a discount shelf. As we're all trying to save a few dollars, there's actually a few great new bookstores that have that. Actually, right in Schenectady, the Open Door is a fantastic little bookshop, and they have a huge wall of brand new books that are at least half off. So that's always one I recommend to people, because I mean, you can get some new books, newer books, and you can save a lot of money. If it's a used shop, the great thing about a used shop, especially something like a book barn or something where there's just too many books for the owner to really realize maybe what they have, is you can find a lot of really early editions or first editions of books that, I mean, in theory, you could go turn around and sell them for like 10 times as much as you bought them for. But I find like first editions of like John Steinbeck, or I found a first edition of Animal Farm, Orwell, for like 50 cents. And it's, you see it and you realize, wow, this is something. But then you don't think about the money, you think about how rare it is and how, it's in your hand and you wonder where it's been in the world and suddenly it's here. And so you find little treasures like that. It's not, the amount, it's what it's worth to you. So those are things that I look for.
Okay, thank you so much. And thanks for the question. So Jen, the next one's for you. It asks if you use a publisher or did you self-publish?
Thanks for asking. I am happy to say that I have done all of the above. I have worked recently, with everyone from Simon & Schuster, Mifflin Harcourt, the big names, which keep getting bought out by bigger names. I also have done what I wanted to do for myself, and I published it myself. But that's a great question, because there's a book I want to recommend, and I think I got cut out by the world of technology. Cut me off. Hopefully it was that and not you, Miss Julie. But there's a book, and I think it's recommended to everybody. It's called Craft in the Real World, and it's very recent, and it's by Matthew, and it's Saleses. It's SALESSES. So it's like sales and then SES. And Craft in the Real World is talking about how writing has been, undergoing these little revolutions along the way. Whereas now, honestly, independent publishing can be much more lucrative and much more exciting than traditional publishing. But you might want to choose traditional publishing, as I did, for certain things, which is connections and agents and editors. Now, I did not have an agent when I first got published. Now I have a literary agent. But this book, Craft in the Real World, is talking about breaking down the barriers in all, not just children's or literature, but it's in everything from poetry to songwriting to everything that we've all been discussing. And it's covering from we need diverse voices to the difference between the diverse voices, to the difference between independence and small, to the traditional, and most importantly, about our own voices. Because just because we've had a certain structure, or we've been taught in English class that you have to have a certain number of acts or scenes or whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily mean we can't break it. Just like the internet's changed everything else, we can change what's moving forward. So this book, Craft in the Real World, I highly recommend it to everyone because it really honestly is mind-blowing. So that was a long explanation for, yes, I've published in all different areas. All I can say is it's ever changing. So there is no more superior and inferior. Independent publishing is just as wonderful as traditional publishers, and traditional publishers can be just as wonderful as independent. Each book and each thing you write can be its own entity.
Okay. Oh gosh, thanks so much. And thank you for that suggestion for another resource for all of us. All right. Erin, I think the next question is for you. And it says, between writing songs and comedy, which do you feel is more difficult to write and or perform? What do you think about that, Erin?
It's interesting to answer that because it's easier, honestly, for me to write comedy, but it's more difficult to perform. It's hard to explain why that is. I think comedy in general is much more difficult to perform for music, and that you require so much more from the audience, and you don't always know if you're going to get that. And you could have a horrible night on stage and it has nothing to do with your abilities, but you're already so self-conscious about it that it's hard to tell yourself, okay, no, like other comedians will be like, that was a bad audience, right? It's not just me. So it's so much more like nerve-wracking to get up. And I don't know if that's because comedy is newer to me, and music is just comfortable. I mean, I definitely still get nervous doing some music shows, but nothing like how I get when I do comedy. It's a great payoff once you go through with it, but it's definitely more nerve-wracking. But as far as writing, the songs, they require more. I think they take more. I think the jokes, maybe they come a little more naturally to me. But the jokes seem to flow out a lot easier than the songs. The songs you really have to sit and work on and spend time with and nurture. Whereas the jokes, I mean, you could write a joke in 2 seconds if you're having a good day. You know, I've written them on the spot. I've said stuff off the cuff on stage that ends up being in the set for the rest of my life. So hope that answers it.
Yes, thank you so much. I know sometimes the best things do come just off the cuff, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
All right, David, we've got a question for you. And the question is there a piece of dialogue or a monologue that inspired you as an early playwright that really wowed you?
There's a couple of plays that I was introduced to as an actor early that I found incredible. Equus and, oh my God, the playwright's name escapes my brain at this moment, but the play Equus is just a phenomenal piece of writing. And I was introduced to things like Arthur Miller and Death of a Salesman and Streetcar Named Desire and Eugene O'Neill plays. And so especially in college, I got to study an awful lot of the greatest dramatic literature of the mid-century. And that was all very, very inspirational to me.
Excellent. Thank you. My gosh, my reading list is growing longer listening to all of you. Goodness. The last question we have, unless anybody wants to type one in the chat, is, and this is for everyone, which books or authors or non-literary art are inspiring you these days? Anybody have any answers to that one?
Sure, I'll jump in if no one else is going to right out of the gate, but I actually was just reading something before this presentation. I was reading some poetry by Leonard Cohen, and I haven't read anything by him before. I obviously know him as a songwriter, and I thought upon getting a few pages in, I'm about halfway through now, that this really is it's a phenomenal balance between lyrical songwriting and narrative poetry, and it feels so much more accessible than I expected it to be too. So if poetry is something that kind of feels like it's not in your wheelhouse, or it's too hard to get into, but maybe you like great lyricists or great songwriters, this might be a great way to get into it. It's not too much of one way or the other. It doesn't read like lyrics from a song. It's a really beautiful balance between lyrical and narrative, and highly recommend it. It's called The Flame by Leonard Cohen.
Thank you. How about anyone else? Anyone have an answer to that one?
I can answer a bit of a different question. What's inspiring me is, well, as I was listening to the panel, I related very much to Erin and her story, and I'm excited to visit bookshops now, and that reminded me of James. And what David said about relationships is how I feel like I would want to end. Writing can seem isolating, and here's the cat. Okay, writing can seem isolating, but it can't be done, as he said, it can't be done, alone. Whether it's a play, you can write it, but you need all the people around you, the performers. You need agent, publisher, you need readers, obviously. I did want to shout out Open Door Bookstore also, because they have been extremely supportive of me. And that's also a great place to go if you're looking for inspiration. So just go into the children's sections, but go see authors, when the authors come to speak, even if you've never heard of them before, you might soon be hearing about them, or you may just find, a community or a friend or something to relate to. Just like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, the SCBWI it's called, is a great place for us all to meet, children's authors and teen authors, young adult authors, the bookstore and the bookshops. And I cannot wait to get back in them. That's what's inspiring me, because I'm going to get back and I'm going to be able to see people face to face. So that's what's really inspiring me today.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
All right. And it looks like our last question we have here is for David. And it's, is it better to write too long of a play and edit it later, or limit it to a certain length?
I would say yes. Before I say that, can answer the question, can I just give a shout out to theaters and live theater? As we talk about, different inspirations and things, unlike books you can order online, theaters have been closed. Theaters have been closed for a year. That means everyone who works in the theater, from concession people to backstage people to writers, well, writers can write, but they can't get anything produced, to actors, everybody has just been waiting and keeping their skills up and trying their best to keep positive. So I would just give a shout out to, once we can open up and all be together again, please consider going to the theater and supporting theater and all writing and everything else. But and I would say, I tend to underwrite, not because I think it's a good idea, but I start a scene and I seem to get to the point of the scene very, very quickly. And I find I write a first draft. If it's going to end up being 100 pages, I write a first draft and it's 50 pages or it's 60 pages. And I have to look for the ideas that I just started to develop or barely developed, and develop them more in rewrites as I go. I know wonderful writers who write reams of material and have more of a task to edit or focus as they go. I would say the only thing you can do that won't work well for you is to not keep working on a piece. I have done a certain amount of teaching in my career, and to give feedback to somebody on a play, and they've written what they wanted to write. They had their story, they wrote their draft, they really got it out of their system, and they're not interested in continuing to work, is fine. It's just, for most people, if you're not Edward Albee and can write, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 2 weeks as a young man and say that's it. Most people, the work gets better as you rewrite and as you craft. And I will rewrite the Red Maple that they did at Capitol Rep was in its 10th draft when we went into rehearsals, and there were more drafts after that. And for myself, not only is it a process of developing a scene or developing a character, but it's developing the exact wording of a sentence. It's changing the the few words or a couple of adjectives. So each time the rewrite is in great detail, as well as being sort of a bigger sweep of the thing. And I would say, if you keep working at it and keep honing at it and keep continuously. I did fights and comic gags as a choreographer for somebody a couple of years ago. And the play was Noises Off. Michael Frayn, if I'm saying his last name correctly. Noises Off has been a famous play for 30 years. There were multiple Broadway productions and revivals and a film and everything else. And at the time, the manuscript of Noises Off that I read 5 years ago for this production had his latest notes and tweaks and changes to the script. One of the most successful plays ever written commercially 30 years ago. And he was tweaking it. And he said, these are my latest tweaks. And this was about 2015. So, art projects are never finished. You just abandon them at some point. You decide, okay, I'm done with it now. But I would just encourage, whether you're writing long and editing or whether you're writing short and adding, to just keep plugging away at drafts. It gets better every single time.
Thank you, David. All right. Well, gosh, we are nearing the end of our time together, and so appreciate everybody being here. You know, we're filled with lots of good, chewy food for thought, and that is thanks to our 4 panelists, David Bunce, Jennifer Roy, Erin Harkes, and James Duncan. So appreciate you all being with us. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank my co-organizer, Zach, for all the writing in the arts events. We do have one more event or events coming up. We are going to have a series of 12 readings by diverse female children's authors read by SLOC performers. We'll have videos of those available in the next week or 2. So please look for those. There's a wonderful array performed by some wonderful folks. Also like to thank our Vice President, Adrienne, for giving that nice talk at the beginning. And then a particular shout out to Audrey Carlton, who's the Director of PR and Advertising for SLOC. And she's just been a remarkable help to both Zach and me. And we really appreciate that. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and hope you found some ideas for your own writing life. Continue engaging with the power and the beauty and the magic of words. I think we would all agree that there's an endless supply of possibility there, and we hope that you find your own. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.